Our O-lineman, Damian Woody. What am I saying? The Chiefs had to shuffle their line. Joe Thuney, 5 starts at left tackle. They got beaten in the trenches by Philly, as we all saw in the Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes sacked 6 times in Super Bowl 59. Most he's been sacked in any game in his career. But the only changes they've really made so far are, obviously, they traded away Thuney, and they signed Jaylen Moore to play tackle. He's made 10 starts there at tackle in his career, left tackle last year, weeks 12 through 16. Chiefs' top priority was getting Mahomes some protection. So, D. Woody, do you have any concerns that they haven't made more moves?
Absolutely. And listen, there's still a lot of offseason left. We still got the draft, and you never know what pieces that you're going to add, throughout the rest of the offseason. But, you're betting on upside with Jaylen Moore right now. That's what the Chiefs are betting on with the young man coming from the 49ers. But I look at the Kansas City Chiefs. 3 out of the 5 positions on that offensive line are big question marks. So I don't know if the Kansas City Chiefs have solved their issues on the offensive line. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done with that unit.
Yeah, I agree. I do understand some of the Chiefs' thinking in the moves that they made. Essentially, they chose Trey Smith, paying him over, that cap space, also going to Joe Thuney. They traded. They wanted the draft pick. And they also clearly had belief in Kingsley Suamataya's ability to play guard, which he did the final game of the season. I also think, Ronnie Stanley returning to Baltimore, weren't that many tackle options. Clearly, they saw something in Jaylen Moore in his brief time in San Francisco, backing up Trent Williams when he started, that they liked. That's all fine. They still need to keep throwing resources at the problem with those draft picks. Keep drafting, particularly at the tackle position, because as we have seen now, Patrick Mahomes only loses Super Bowls when he does not have sufficient pass protection.
There you go. He was sacked 47 times last season, by the way, 10 more than any other season in his career. All right, now we're going to go back in the trenches with the Texans. They had so many issues on the offensive line last season. Caleb Williams was the only player who sacked more times than CJ Stroud, and Houston completely reshaped it. All 5 positions expected to be started by different players than they had in Week 1 last season. Laramie Tunsil, Kenyon Green, Shaq Mason, all moving on. I know, D. Woody, a lot of people found that Tunsil move surprising. In fact, some people who were on this show today. But what's your assessment of what they've done overall with that O-line?
I mean, clearly, I think between coaching and personnel, they figured, we need to start anew on the offensive line. I also think the offensive coordinator played a role in why they made these changes as well. But when you look at the Laramie Tunsil move, everyone is caught up on, how many Pro Bowls and All Pros. This dude was a much penalized guy at the left tackle position. So, and he tends to want to get paid all the time. But Houston needs a lot of work on the offensive line. There's no question about it. You got to be able to keep CJ Stroud upright. Took way too many hits. And where they sit right now, this is definitely not a finished product for the Houston Texans up front.
Yeah, I guess if they figured we're not going to be great on the offensive line, better to be cheap than be expensive and stink on the offensive line. I mean, certainly they've cut some salary here, but there's a lot of work that still has to be done. And I think you mentioned the offensive coordinator, Nick Caley, is going to play a big role here, the new OC in Houston. That they're going to change their scheme, more motion, more gap runs as opposed to some of the zone runs. A lot of the stuff we saw in Los Angeles with the Rams, that stuff maybe going to make life easier for the offensive linemen, be a little more aggressive, more attacking, just hit guys more, not be in so many passive situations. I think that's a way maybe to help the line play better, even if there's not necessarily great names on paper in Houston.
CJ Stroud was under pressure on 36% of his dropbacks. That was 33rd of 36 quarterbacks. I know, it's so painful. Seriously. All right, still to come, the Packers have a young and talented wide receiver.
Could use some stability at quarterback, as a lot of teams could. What are you hearing about them adding an arm?
Well, my understanding is the Browns are still in on Russell Wilson. That's hardly a slam dunk to happen, but they've talked to him. They met with him last week. Still in the mix there. Carson Wentz is considered a contingency plan here. He's going to wait for the dominoes to fall here, but there is some mutual interest on that front. Even dating back to the Combine, Browns had some interest there. And then, other than that, they're going to try to shake out Shedeur Sanders potentially. Cam Moore, top of the draft. I do know that some Cleveland brass there has some love for some of those top quarterbacks. They see them as positive. So number 2 might be a little rich, but, we'll see what they shake out. And meanwhile, Kirk Cousins, the problem there is I do believe that he would be a top option for Cleveland if he were available.
Right.
Atlanta right now, as of today's date, has not made him available, so Cleveland can't really check that off their list.
Yeah, you heard the visceral reaction from Matt when Carson Wentz's name was mentioned. I think Browns fans might have that same kind of reaction if that actually happens. Kirk Cousins is the best fit in terms of the on-field situation if he does come available from Atlanta. Kevin Stefanski knows him from Minnesota, really helped unlock him with a play-action-heavy attack. We hope Kirk Cousins may be a little healthier in terms of the Achilles injury he came back from last season. And people forget, before that shoulder injury he suffered in Week 10 against the Saints, Kirk Cousins was playing really good football. He was 12th in the NFL in total QBR at that point, one spot ahead of Jared Goff, who was an MVP candidate at that point of the season. I know he's not 100%. I know the Falcons have said, yeah, we want to hold on to him. Money talks after a while. I don't think they want to pay him all the money he's guaranteed this year. I think at the end of the day, these two teams are going to find common ground. The Falcons are going to need some of the money. The Browns are going to need some of the money. Just makes more sense to have him playing somewhere in 2025.
Dangle some draft picks. I mean, you've got a valuable asset there for teams that might want a Kirk Cousins.
And the Browns have at least 10 picks.
There you go. Take advantage.
They don't have the money, though. That's the problem.
The money is the issue with a lot of them. Trey Hendrickson, speaking of money, his future in Cincinnati remains in limbo. We know they just spent a lot of money on receivers. What can you tell us about going on there?
Matt, I just checked in on this. I was told it's silent. No new traction on the contract front between Hendrickson and the Bengals, who did reconvene last week, tried to reignite talks, try to find a common ground on a new contract because the Bengals are not eager to trade him. Even though there is trade interest, they have not shown a willingness to want to do it. They're probably not getting a first-round pick for Hendrickson at this stage because that new team has to pay him well over $30 million per year. So you saw Danielle Hunter last night got a deal done with the Houston Texans at 1 year, $35 million. I am told the Bengals have floated the possibility of a one-year deal extension for Hendrickson, something similar, but they would have to get the right money. Cincinnati has just not been in the ballpark yet, so this will continue to go on. And this is a player that I suspect could sit out games if this doesn't get resolved, if he's asked to play on his current salary.
Yeah, it's just tough to imagine this Bengals defense competing without Trey Hendrickson in the mix. Last year, what he did was maybe unprecedented in modern football. ESPN has a stat called sacks created, which measures not only the sacks you create for yourself with a one-on-one run, but also what you do for other players when you create sacks for other players in your lineup. Trey Hendrickson created 26 sacks last season for the Bengals. Nobody else in football created more than 14 and a half. Danielle Hunter, the player Jeremy just mentioned, was second with 14 and a half sacks created. He nearly doubled the rest of the NFL. That is how impressive and how essential he was for the Cincinnati Bengals last season. So it is going to be critical to get him back. I know they have so much on offense, but we saw last year, all those guys were great on offense and they still missed the postseason because the defense couldn't hold up, and that was with Trey Hendrickson. So imagine what it's going to be like without him if they trade him to another organization.
And to that end, they were losing games and they were...
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Ngày hôm nay mình sẽ tiếp tục hướng dẫn các bạn câu tượng. Tượng hôm nay của mình sẽ có tiêu đề là quả na. Bạn hôm nay tượng của mình sẽ có tiêu đề là măng cụt. Bây giờ mình bắt đầu tô nhá.